Okay, so tonight we're talking about faith and reason. And before I get into the meat of the matter, there's something that I think is very important to do. How many of us, when we hear the word reason, something happens inside of us that makes us feel like, I don't know if I want to go there. When you hear the word philosophy, when you hear the word thought, or intellectual activity, how many of us get a little knot in our stomachs because of some experience of schooling, of education? Yeah? We all have common experiences of school, of teachers, of parents, of siblings who have, in some way or another, said something to us, buffed us. We've realized our own inadequacies and our strengths. Yeah? And so it has tainted, in one sense, the way in which we can be open to hear this talk. Because we already come with a sense of, wow, that whole thing of faith and reason that this church talks about, that's too much. That's like a cloud out there that's just a lot of stuff. And already if I were to talk to some of my friends, if I were to say to them, well, the church says so and so and so and so and so and so. I have a friend in particular who says, blah, blah, blah. Because in a sense, that's what he's hearing. It's not broken down for him. How many of us hear things in the church and feel like, I have no clue what they're saying. No clue where they're coming from. No clue. But I know it must make sense. Yeah? So be conscious of that. And be conscious of where you are in that whole thing. Faith and reason. Well, faith and reason is most often expressed in the church in the words theology and philosophy. And it's closely related to another set of words that are paired together, God and science. Subtle differences, but very related. So I just want to start by quoting something from Blessed John Paul II, because he wrote a whole encyclical called Faith and Reason. And in the beginning of that, he says, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the heart of the human a desire to know truth. Faith and reason are like these two wings on which the human spirit, the human person, rises to contemplate truth. And who is truth? Jesus. God is truth. So that it is not faith alone, but faith and reason which brings us into the contemplation of God. Which, according to many mystics and many writers in our church, is the ultimate purpose of our lives. The beatific vision, the contemplation of who God is, union with God. So, we need both faith and reason. Now, so I address this mental block that we may have because we need to understand these words. So, I want to invite you to journey with me, and part of this talk requires you to think. And maybe think a little more because of the type of topic matter. So I hope you'll not fall asleep. Somehow we imagine at times that we just can't apply reason to the faith that we have. Why should we apply reason to this belief in God? Yeah, Dave? I see you nodding your head. But as we shall see, if God is all that is true, and if God communicates to us through revelation, then there are things about this truth that we can discern through reason. In other words, there is a certain rationality about all that God is. there's a certain reasonableness of God, about God. And to engage in the mystery of God, we begin by engaging in what is reason. So, what do we mean when we say theology or faith? And they're linked. Starting with theology. Theology basically is this attempt that we make to understand the God-human experience that has come to us through revelation. Some 2,000 plus years ago, something happened. Jesus Christ came. The full and definitive revelation of God. And so, theology is a journey in which we begin to try and unravel what does all of this mean to us. And faith is a response that we make to that. And it's a free response to this revelation of God. It is God who is continually at work revealing God's very self, and the fullness of that revelation comes to bear in Jesus Christ. So, as St. Anselm says, theology is faith-seeking understanding. Our faith-seeking understanding. You with me so far? Okay. It is a recognition of what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12, that for now we see dimly in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall understand fully. In other words, then means when the consummation of all time happens, the parousia, as we say, the end of time, when Christ shall come again, when we shall all be united, then we shall see God as God really is. But now we only see glimpses of that. And what we do through reason is create the building blocks for us to say, okay, this is what we're dealing with here. This is what has been revealed. Because God and God's very self cannot deceive us. That is against the very nature of who God is. God reveals truth, and God is truth, and therefore God gives us what is true. And therefore, if God has given us what is true, through reason, then you should be able to make sense of it in some way, but God is also mystery. And so what we see now is just a glimpse of it, but the full mystery is yet to be revealed. And what faith does for us is faith helps us to launch in that mystery. But reason provides the building blocks that allow us to stand before we launch off. Otherwise, you could be believing anything and everything, and it may not be true. It makes us realize that the encounter with truth is an encounter with all that we are. Not just an affective part of us, a social or emotive part of us that responds to prayer, but an intellectual part of us as well. Amen? So, through reason, our intellectual activity can grasp something of what has been revealed. Paul in Romans 1, 19 to 20 says, "What can be known about God is perfectly plain to them, since God has made it plain to them. Ever since the creation of the world, the invisible existence of God and His everlasting power have been clearly seen by the mind's understanding of created things." In other words, when we look around us in creation, we can sense a certain order, a certain norm, a certain way that speak to us about who God really is. And through the use of our reason, we begin to say something about God. We begin to make sense of revelation and what is going on in this whole dynamic, this relationship that we're on. So, the human journey. And I want to quote from Acts 17, and it's a wonderful passage where we all know it. Paul goes to Athens, and he is there speaking to the people at the Areopagus. And he walks around and he sees all these altars to different gods, and then he sees one to an unknown God. You know the story? Yeah? Okay. So Paul says to them, "From one ancestor He made all nations to inhabit the whole world. And he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him. Grope means search out in darkness, that feeling, and find him. Though indeed he is not far from each one of us. In other words, inside of the human heart is this longing for truth. Because God is truth. And because we're made in the image of God, there is that spark of the divine in us, to use Greek philosophy. That mark of the divine in us, that mark of truth within us. That says something that makes us want to know more because we are made for this truth. When we say we're made for God and we won't be happy, part of that reality is that we're made for truth. And we won't be happy until we come into this recognition, this realization of truth, because that is who God is. And so each of us has questions. And many of our young people today have many questions. And part of the challenge is that many Catholics don't know how to answer these questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of suffering? Why is there something rather than nothing? Yeah? Where have I come from? Where am I going to? Why do things happen? These questions, the search for truth that is like something inside of us that keeps gnawing at us. It makes us unsettled. And sure, at some time we put it to rest and we find ways to answer it. But it's really a longing for who God is. Because everything finds fulfillment in God. Particularly in Jesus Christ. Amen? So, Blessed John Paul, in the document he wrote, Fides et Ratio, that encyclical, he speaks about the way in which this search can be seen in every single culture, in every religion, even the writings of Homer, even as far back as the Greeks and ancient civilizations. In every single culture, you see this need to discover, this need to understand, this need to answer these questions, and they create myths, they create writings, they create ways of living and cultural expressions that seek to respond to the questions that keep, as it were, bothering us and make us not just settle and be happy. So there's something a little more there. In humanity's search and engagement with the truth, there has been the discovery of principles, of certain things that are common all over. As we all know, in every form of religion, at least the great religions of our world, the main religions, there is some form of expression of what we call the golden rule. Right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Think somebody went wrong and taught them all that? No. There is the mark of caring for our young. What else do we see? With a deepening knowledge and realization of things around us, there is a deepening of who we are as human beings. The more we learn about our world out there, the more we learn about ourselves as well. Because we realize our own limitations. As I started off by saying, we're in a classroom and you just know your own limitations because in learning about these things, I really find this hard. Or it's easy for me. We begin to learn about who we are. And we begin to realize that I am a multidimensional person. And that there's an awareness of my activity of thinking. Yeah? Humans are probably the only known species that can think about their thinking. You understand that? Yeah? we could reflect and say, why was I, my mom used to say, why did I think about that? What was I thinking about, Why did I do that? Or we reflect on the processes that go through our mind. So, to quote Blessed John Paul again, within visible creation, the human person is the only creature who is not only capable of knowing, but who knows that he or she knows. And is therefore interested in the real truth of what he or she perceives. People cannot be genuinely indifferent to the question of whether what they know is true or not. In other words, if you know something is false, something is a lie, then you seek what is true. To do otherwise would be detrimental to who we are. And again, for us, the huge momentous thing that has happened is Jesus Christ who has come to tell us that I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. So, in the whole journey of our humanity, there has always been this pull and tug between faith and reason. There have been times of conflict. There have been times of independence. There have been times of dialogue. And within our own times, there's more and more integration. So there's been a lot of ups and downs. And even within Paul's writings, we see this. I used 2 texts from Paul just now that speak about the use of reason and philosophy. Well, 1 text from Paul and 1 text from Acts. And in the first text, he speaks about the way in which a mind has to come to know, in which God has made it evident for us to see. In the second text, it's in Acts, and it's Paul speaking to the Athenians and appealing to them through their own way. But also, we see in Paul this divergent conflict because in, I think it's Colossians 2:8, we would see that he says, let no one take you captive through philosophy and empty deceit. Or 1 Corinthians 1:27, something that a lot of people, we're all familiar with at some level. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Yeah? You know that text? And it speaks about the wisdom of the cross as well. So Paul here highlights that true wisdom is found in the apparent folly of the crucified Christ. And it takes faith to grasp that. But not without reason. We need both. And somehow, we find ways at times, and in some ways we're all guilty of it at different times, to justify through passages like these 2 that I've just spoken about from Paul, why, you have to be careful with studies. And what does it really do? It masks our own insecurities and fears regarding studies and the academic enterprise. The use of reason in one way or another. More dangerously, what has happened is that passages like that have been used or misused to suggest that one must not think too much about God. Don't think too much about God. Just believe. Yeah? I'm sure somebody has said that to us at one point. Don't think too much. What are you thinking so much about? Just believe. Just have faith. But when we look at the tradition of our faith from the earliest times, we see a very clear attempt at bringing together faith and reason. Starting from Paul, and even before Paul. We see this movement of bringing together faith and reason. Think of the early church. Think of the creed that we have. In our creed, which is a beautiful testimony of all Christians, the core beliefs of our faith, what we may call dogmas, that didn't just appear. That happened in a time when there was huge heresies and huge divisions, and there was a lot of thought going around and a lot of philosophy and a lot of reasoning out. How could God be man and God? How could Jesus be that? How could Mary be mother of God? All these different things. on and on and on. How could we square this notion of the Trinity? And it was the fathers of our church in those early centuries after Christ's life, death, and resurrection that worked it out through the use of reason. Reason. Sure, we don't all have to go through that, and therefore we say, well, they've worked it out, and therefore we trust the tradition of 2,000 plus years and say, well, I believe. And that's fine. But it's there for us to learn, to discover, if we want to. And sometimes we should glimpse into it, since all of this is a mere glimpse into the eternal reality that is fully God. So, faith and reason. And therefore, we have to be really careful about how we approach our own understanding of faith. Because one of the temptations, there are two sides you could swing in this. There's the temptation to be superstitious and treat faith as a magical thing because we don't apply reason to it. And in that temptation, we see things like the notion that baptism is some form of a powerful charm to protect my child. Or people who believe that I have to get anointed because I'm going straight to heaven. Yes, eventually you may reach there, but you still have to make up for all that you've done. And that's what purgatory is about. Or the idea that, through the sacrament of the marriage, we'll change. We'll become new people. All of a sudden. All of these evade the personal responsibility that if we were to put a little thought into it, would be evident. Yeah? Faith and reason. So that's one temptation there. So reason helps us to purify the notion we have of God. It moves away the ancient myths and provides a rational foundation for one's belief in the divine. This is, again, John Paul speaking. Superstitions were recognized for what they were, and religion was, at least in part, purified through rational analysis. It was on this basis that the fathers of the church entered into fruitful dialogue with ancient philosophy, which offered new ways of proclaiming and understanding the God of Jesus Christ. Exactly what we were talking about in the Creed. That unless reason could be applied to what was revealed to us through this direct revelation, this full revelation, this definitive revelation of Jesus Christ, then where would we be? And so in searching, in seeking, the fathers of the church found ways to express what we believe. What else does reason do? In our own lives, the only way we could reach out to other people who may not know of Christ, is through the use of reason. You have to start there in many ways. Why is this? Think of what the apostles did when they went out, especially to pagans who have no concept of the Judeo-Christian world, no concept of Moses or the prophets, no concept of all of this thing that they were talking about, foretold and Jesus coming. No concept of that. How do they bring an understanding of the faith that they have received to all these people? Except through the use of what they already have. Their own common sense. Their own sense of reason. Their own self-consciousness. And as Paul did, say to them, well, that's what you don't know about, that's the God we're speaking about. That's why that passage is such a powerful, powerful methodology to evangelization. You all with me? Yes. Okay. So, I just want to take a little moment and think about other Christian religions and reason, and our own understanding of faith and reason. Because many other Christians may say to you, okay, you Catholics hold faith and reason in balance, as our Holy Father, our past Holy Father said, wings of the human spirit that raise us to the contemplation of the truth. And there are many other Christians who say to you, no. And you'll get varying degrees from no reason at all, just believe, to reason can never be equated with faith. Now, let's think a little bit about why that may be so. And to think about that, we have to go to the 15th and 16th century, where you had the Reformation, and the build-up to the Reformation and the Reformation itself. And what happened in the Reformation? The Protestant theologians, Luther, Calvin, etc., Zwingli, they basically began challenging a lot of things that the church taught. And Calvin and Luther, and many evangelicals and Protestants today, would tell you something like this. They would say that because of original sin, because of the fall that we have, we are dead, completely depraved, completely wretched, guilty, condemned, totally lost, helpless, but for the grace of God. We've heard that before somewhere. You hear it in music, and we may not even recognize it. For instance, some of you may be aware that in some Catholic circles, they change the words of Amazing Grace to Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. But in some Catholic circles, they change the word to soul like me. Yeah? You all have heard that before? No? But I know one parish that did that. Not here in Trinidad. And it was because when Protestants sing that song and when a Catholic sings that song, you mean two totally different things. Two totally different things. For Protestants, for evangelicals, completely gone. There's nothing of our own will we can do because original sin, that fall, has basically crippled us beyond repair. Totally crippled us, totally depraved, wretched. We are hopelessly so. And therefore they would say, wholly of grace are we saved. But within such an understanding, if human nature is so corrupt and so unreliable, then human reason cannot contribute anything to what is uplifting and good. And therefore, they would say that you can't equate faith and reason. You follow what I'm saying? Therefore, they would say that you must just believe. Well, what does the church teach? And this is the Council of Trent, which was, in a sense, a response. Council of Trent stated, although human nature has been savagely wounded by the fall, it has not been totally corrupted. Though prone to errors, reason is still capable of apprehending truth. And so philosophy is too. Now, it doesn't take too much to reason that. Because since we could think about our own thinking, there's a level to which we could recognize that I could still grasp truth. Yeah? And so, for us, we are not totally wretched. And our reason is a mark of that which is still there within us. So is our freedom. Both marks of who God is. God is totally free. God is all that is true. So we understand that? Why there would be divergent views. And for us as Catholics, faith and reason, therefore, go hand in hand. And therefore, to appreciate why the church makes a big deal out of that, you have to appreciate or understand what other Protestants, what evangelicals are saying. and how different our stance on the understanding of original sin and its impact on our lives has, and the ramifications that has to the way we live, the way we encounter, the way we manifest our faith. Amen? Okay, so for the church, both faith and reason then are about seeking the truth of reality. They're seeking an answer to some deeper question. Thus, they both lead to truth. Both are necessary for understanding the world and who we are, but at different levels. And for the church, the truth conveyed by the light of faith surpasses that conveyed by natural reason. And obviously so, because faith brings us to encounter something that's beyond us. Something that even then we can't fully grasp. And if you think about it a little more, faith and reason both build on tradition. You always hear in the academic world that you have to stand on the shoulders of those who went before you. That you can't just come and say, well, I'm going to just invent the wheel here, because it has been done and refined in many ways. Sure, you add to it. That's what you do. You add to the long tradition of thinking that has gone on. And in our faith too, we hold to tradition. This living tradition that has been passed on from generation to generation through the centuries. And that we can be present here talking about faith and reason. And all the other things we've spoken about. And therefore, when we think about faith, we're thinking about truth with a capital T. The truth that is necessary for our salvation. That's what the knowledge of faith and the light of faith brings to us. The truth of who we are and who God is. The full revelation in Jesus Christ and the invitation to walk in His light, and knowing that walking away from it is our own condemnation. And when we think about reason, we think about truth with a common T. We think about the truths of this world. The geography, the anthropology, the biology, the physics, the understanding of how this world operates and how we work and how we are. So God communicates to us the truth that is necessary for our salvation. And for this world and understanding many other things, He gives us a brain. And through our brain, we can sense, understand, create, communicate through media, build, etc., flourish as a human family. But what faith communicates to us is that God desires that family to be one, to be united, to come to know God, to walk in His ways. What is necessary for our salvation? Yeah? So, we have to learn to keep both in balance. And that is very important. Pope John Paul II again. The knowledge proper to faith does not destroy the mystery. It only reveals it more, showing how necessary it is for people's lives. Faith sharpens the inner eye, opening the mind to discover in the flux of events the workings of providence. Here, the words of the book of Proverbs are pertinent. This is Proverbs 16:9. The human mind plans the way, but the Lord directs the steps. Think again. God gives us a brain to figure out many things in this natural world, but through revelation, through faith, we come to know the truth that is necessary for salvation. The human mind plans the way, but the Lord directs the steps. And he says, this is to say that with the light of reason, human beings can know which path to take. But they can only follow that path to its end quickly and unhindered only if with a rightly tuned spirit they search for it within the horizon of faith. Through reason, through science, there are many small truths. But in a sense, all these should be pointing us to the big truth. That is God. So, and for us, truth is a person. We know that, right? A person that we encounter. Not just an idea. A person that is Jesus Christ. And that is why that scene with Pilate in John 18 is so important. When Jesus stands before him and Pilate says, "What is truth?" And Jesus remains silent. Because Pilate is staring directly at truth and is blind to it. Is blind to it. And in many ways, one of the challenges we face in our world today with faith and the understanding of who we are is because many are blind to the truth that lies open before us. In the words of John Paul, the weight of the many small t's, truths of this world, and the overly obsessed nature that we have in discovering science and all these things have kind of become so heavy that our field of vision has not been able to raise to the transcendent. It has just stayed right here, looking around at us all, and not realized that there's a bigger T involved, a bigger truth involved here. That all of this is just temporary. And that's why it's important to hold faith and reason in a good balance. Okay, everyone is with me? Yeah? Okay. Just 3 ways in which, classically in Catholic tradition, another big name, St. Thomas Aquinas, don't get afraid. Some people get afraid when they hear his name. But Thomas Aquinas speaks about 3 ways in which reason, philosophy, can be used in sacred teaching. And it's good for us to know, to think about, because it's practical stuff for evangelization. 1, and we've been speaking about this, not explicitly, but it's been there. Reason gives rise to the preambles of faith. In other words, through the ways we think, we clear the ground for faith. Just think about someone that you're journeying with, or someone who you're reaching out to. There are ways in which you're speaking to them about things that are not directly the matter of faith, but what you're doing is preparing the ground to build something on. Yeah? So, reason provides a foundation for belief, removing things which may entangle faith. So, through reason, we could think about who is God and who are we? And are we called to something bigger than us? Secondly, through reason, we can use the method of analogy. And think about what an analogy is. You move from something that is known to something that is unknown. And therefore you can move to the unknowable. And an analogy is never perfect. It's an imitation of something that exists. And this is, I wouldn't say it's a good example, but it's an example. Think about how we care for our young, or how a mother cares. We see that in our world. But it says to us that caring, that abstract reality of caring, is important for us. It's important to being human. But it also points to something that's beyond that. That because we're made in God's image and likeness, caring itself is part of the nature of who God is. That in being given all the opportunities we have in life and all of that, it's God's goodness to us, freely given. So that's the method of analogy. So the first one was clearing the ground. Reason helps us clear the ground. It gives preambles to faith. What is there before? And then, use of analogy. And thirdly, he says, reason can be used to counter what is said against faith by other philosophies, showing that these things are either false or not necessary. You know, there's an old saying that says, ideas rule. Well, they actually do. Because people operate out of ways of thinking. And these ways of thinking begin with could either be misdirected, misunderstood, may be built on something that is not too coherent. So the use of reason itself is to challenge ways of thinking that are wrong. And that's part of what this whole program is about. That, it's in one part saying to people, hey, have you really thought about what the church offers? What the church is? What your faith is? What the experience of Jesus Christ is? What the relationship that you're called to is about? What Christian community gathering and growing together is about? Have you really thought about that? Or have you just gone away because of something and your own thinking? Have you created your own methodology, your own processes? Are you living by your own truth and calling that truth? So reason helps us to challenge ways in which there are things counter to faith, opposed to faith. So 3 ways. Just to recap them. 1, reason helps us to clear the ground, lay some preambles, building blocks, so we could jump off into faith. 2, we can use it to make analogies. When you observe all these things, and we know this, this leads us to think about something that we may not know, and therefore say something about what is beyond us. And 3, we can use reason in itself, which we all do in some way, to reason with people who see it different. And just a word of caution, it's not about, that image of beating the Bible over somebody's head. It's not about that. But, for the church, the very process of journeying with someone as they think through their faith, and Thomas spoke about this in his own testimony of having read a lot of the Summa, of Aquinas' Summa, that in itself is a process of coming to know God. As John Paul would say, in coming to think rightly, what they call recta ratio, coming to think in a way that is not hindered by different agendas, that in itself is a discovery of who God is. Yeah? Okay. So that's faith and reason. Just one word on science and religion. Religion may ask why things happen, seeking meaning and purpose, looking to transcendent reality. But science is asking how they happen. How things happen in this physical world. And as I said before, reason, it provides many small T's, many small truths. And sometimes not, because many things are based on theories. But there's a continuous journey of the human family in discovering who we are, in discovering why we're here. And we continue to build on that journey. We continue to grow. And so, the church would say that God continues to reveal till the end of time. And the church is the place where, as the centuries succeed one another, the church continuously progresses towards the fullness of divine truth. The church herself is on this journey of understanding. And sure, people may say whatever they want about, when you all were in the Middle Ages, people love to hit us with the Middle Ages, or whatever happened in the Dark Ages, etc. That, you all did this and that. But you could also say that we've learned. That through reason, we've come to know more and more who God is. And come to grow in that. And that in itself is a journey of faith. Remember what Paul says, that we only see it dimly, but we grow in this knowledge. We grow in this awareness. And so why does all of this matter to you and I? Because when you think about our lives, we are really in a stream of thoughts, of ideas that are pushing us along in many directions. Yeah? You don't have to think too far. Think of what the Archbishop was here speaking about. Homosexuality or the divorce in our world today, abortion, the many issues that are very heated issues in our world today. And the many different ideologies and ways of thinking about all these things. So that we find ourselves in a world where we ourselves are torn within our own hearts. We live in a world where it's inevitable. We all live with some of these ways of thinking. Some of us may, and we're at different degrees of it as well. So for instance, postmodernity, which the Archbishop began speaking about, where we think about ourselves as I am the authority. We move from modernity that saw science as the authority to postmodernity that says the individual is the authority. But what that has brought us is a greater sense of choice. And when we think about our own individual lives and the way we value who we are as individuals and that autonomy, there are postmodern marks in there. Not that it's wrong in that sense, but that everything has to come into dialogue with the gospel values and what the gospel asks of us. So, as I end, let us just think for a moment of Mary, Our Lady. She's the one who Scripture tells us ponders everything in her heart, unafraid of thinking about it, unafraid of thinking about a reality that is so much beyond her, a reality that, yes, she's recognizing certain things and trying to make sense of it, but there's a lot she has to ponder, a lot she has to think through, and yet believe. And therefore she can hold for us an example of holding faith and reason in balance. Amen.